What if you could flip a hidden off switch and instantly shut down any narcissist control? They've hacked your emotions, but today you take back the power. There are 3 things you need to know if you have a manipulator in your life right now. It's an acronym called FOG, FOG. Manipulators will use one of these 3 methods to get what they want. So let's talk about what that acronym means. F is fear, O is obligation, and guilt. So now you'll be able to categorize them when you hear manipulators speak to you. Next, one more thing you need to be able to determine is what the manipulator is seeking. You'll always be able to spot one of the 4 CAVA signs, C-A-V-A. This is about what they are trying to gain. And this is control, approval, validation, and attention. Now that you know this, here's how to deal with these people in your life. The first thing is mirror their intentions, not their actions. So instead of reacting to their manipulation, reflect back their underlying intent. If they're being passive aggressive, recognize the insecurity behind it and respond to their need for validation without validating the manipulation itself. And I promise we're going to go into this. So here's some practical application tips here. Identify the core intention behind their manipulative behavior. So are they seeking approval, control, validation, or attention? Just by looking beneath the surface of what they're saying or doing, you can better understand what emotional need or strategic outcome that they're really pursuing. Next, respond to the need, not the method. Once you've identified the underlying goal, address it directly, but on your terms. This might involve maybe offering a different solution or reframing their request or simply acknowledging their feelings without caving to the manipulation itself. Stay calm and composed. The manipulators will very often try to stir up strong emotions because it makes others more malleable. By mirroring intentions calmly, you're signaling that you're not emotionally compromised, which diminishes their control over the situation. As an example of this, if a coworker says, "If you don't finish this project for me, I'm going to have to stay late, and that would totally ruin my weekend. But I guess you're too busy to care." This manipulative statement is designed to make you feel responsible for their well-being and obligated to help. So you can see exactly what's going on with FOG and CAVA here. So your reaction, mirroring their intention, might be something like, "I can see that you're stressed and trying to manage your workload. What do you think both of us could do differently so you don't have to stay late?" Here, you're acknowledging their concern, which is the intention of avoiding extra work without falling into the brain trap of doing all the work for them or accepting the blame. Let's talk about the dynamics at play. 1, we're redirecting focus. When we mirror intentions, you shift the focus from emotional manipulation to problem solving or mutual understanding. This disarms the manipulator as their power comes from keeping you entangled in the emotional back and forth. 2 is maintaining autonomy. So this approach prevents you from being coerced into doing things you don't want to do. Just by addressing their needs in a way that aligns with your values and your boundaries, you stay in control of your decisions while still engaging with the other person. 3, preempting escalation. Manipulators very often escalate when their tactics don't work. So by mirroring their intentions, you cut off this path because you're not giving them the emotional reaction they need to escalate the manipulation even further. And this diffuses the situation early on. To get better at mirroring intentions, practice identifying emotional needs in everyday conversations, even non-manipulative ones. So for example, if somebody says, "You never call me anymore," they're likely expressing a need for connection or validation rather than the literal complaint of not receiving calls. This practice is going to hone your ability to see beneath the surface, which is so important when you're dealing with manipulative people. Next, use silent reflection. When a manipulator pressures you, pause for a moment of silence before responding. Practice this right now. This disarms them because it signals that their tactics are not controlling the pace of the interaction, and it also gives you space to think and observe their real agenda. When manipulators employ tactics like guilt tripping, gaslighting, or creating a sense of urgency, they aim to throw you off balance so that you respond without thinking. Silent reflection creates this momentary gap where you can evaluate the situation, recognize the manipulation, and choose a more measured response. Here is how to implement this in real time. When a manipulator makes a statement designed to provoke you, pause. Don't immediately react verbally or emotionally. Maintain either steady eye contact or, if it's appropriate, look away thoughtfully. This signals that you're considering their words without being swayed by them. You're demonstrating a lack of being affected. So take a deep breath to anchor yourself in the moment. Breathing helps to reset your emotional state. It prevents the knee-jerk reactions, and it allows you to observe your own feelings before you respond. During this pause, mentally ask yourself, what are they trying to achieve with this statement or question? This small internal reflection gives you a moment to separate yourself from the manipulative tactic and focus on the bigger picture, which is what they want versus what they are doing. So why is this effective? Manipulators rely on rapid, usually emotionally charged exchanges to push you into a reaction, and silence introduces an unexpected break in that momentum. They might feel pressure to fill the silence or recalibrate their approach because you're not responding in the way that they expect. This puts them off balance. Next, it gives you cognitive space. Manipulation usually works because it overwhelms your emotional responses. It hijacks your ability to think clearly. So by pausing, you give your brain time to process the information logically rather than emotionally. And this makes it easier to spot inconsistencies. So hidden agendas or emotional triggers in their behavior is what we're talking about here. Next, it creates psychological discomfort for the manipulator. Manipulative individuals usually dislike silence because it makes them uncertain about how well their tactics are working. So they rely on constant feedback, either in the form of your agreement, protest, or defensiveness to gauge their success. So by staying silent for a minute, you deny them the emotional validation that they need, which can lead them to second guess their strategy or reveal more about their true intentions. Next, label their behavior calmly. Casually label manipulative behavior as you see it. You might say something like, "It feels like you're trying to make me feel guilty about this. Maybe I'm wrong." This forces the manipulator to confront their tactics without escalating the situation. So labeling a manipulator's behavior is about calling out their tactics in a non-confrontational, neutral way. By calmly identifying what they're doing, whether it's guilt tripping, playing the victim, or using passive aggression, you bring their covert behavior into the open. So this not only interrupts the manipulation, but also forces them to confront their actions without triggering some emotional escalation. So how does it work? When you calmly label a manipulator's tactic, you shift the dynamic by making their hidden behavior explicit. So you're essentially saying, I see what you're doing, without accusing or attacking them. So this brings awareness to their actions, and it usually makes them reconsider their approach, because most manipulators rely on subtlety and emotional confusion to maintain control. So anything you bring to light will have its power lessened. Write that one down. Anything that you bring into light non-confrontationally will have its power lessened. If somebody tries to manipulate you with guilt, let's say a friend says, "I guess you don't really care about me if you can't even make time for a quick visit." They're attempting to make you feel guilty and question your commitment. Your response, if you want to label it calmly, is, it seems like you're saying that I should feel guilty for not visiting. Right here, you're not engaging in the guilt trip, but clearly and calmly just pointing out their tactic. So you've now brought their underlying strategy into the open without reacting emotionally to it. Why is this effective? Lots of manipulators aren't fully conscious of their behavior most of the time. Labeling that calmly forces them to see that label in the moment, and it makes it harder for them to deny or continue those tactics without appearing obviously manipulative. Next, it disarms without escalation. So just by calmly addressing the manipulation, you're avoiding a heated confrontation. And the neutral tone keeps the conversation respectful, and it prevents the manipulator from using your reaction against you, which is usually their goal. When a manipulator realizes their behavior is noticed and labeled, it disrupts their usual strategy. So it makes it harder for them to proceed because you've removed its subtlety and you've exposed it for what it is. Next, I want you to reinforce boundaries with optimism. So when you're setting boundaries, use positive reinforcement instead of defensive language. So as an example, say, I really prefer conversations where we both feel respected, and I know we can reach that here. This subtly points to their overreach without direct confrontation. Next, counter their tactics with curiosity instead of rejecting their manipulative attempts outright. So we're asking probing questions that reveal the irrationality or the hidden motive behind their behavior. So you might say something like, I'm curious, why do you think this is the best way to handle this? This forces them into the uncomfortable position of justifying their manipulation. Next, I want you to reframe manipulative statements as requests. So when they say something coercive, reframe it right away as a straightforward request. And you might say, it sounds like you're asking me to change my schedule for you. Is that what you're suggesting that I do? This shifts the power dynamic and highlights their indirect tactics. So remember that phrase and keep it in your back pocket all the time. Next, force transparency with direct confrontation. This is where you ask them outright, what is it that you actually want? This directness undermines their manipulative approach by bringing their hidden agenda to the surface and compelling them to be transparent. And another way to do this is by asking them directly what their desired outcome is from their behavior. What's the desired outcome? Next, use ambiguity to your advantage. So if they're trying to trap you with a leading question, give a vague or non-committal response. You might say something like, that's an interesting point. Let me think about that. This just diffuses their attempt to manipulate your answer. They can't. Next is flip over the emotional script. Manipulators usually prey on guilt, fear, or obligation. Remember that acronym at the beginning, FOG. We flip the script by expressing empathy for their underlying emotion. We might say something like, it seems like you're really worried about this. Can we talk more about what's bothering you? This sidesteps the tactics and addresses the core issue of them being bothered by something. The next strategy is to anchor yourself in a third-party perspective. So when manipulators are trying to entangle you emotionally, mentally step outside the situation and imagine how a neutral third party would see everything. This gives you distance and it makes it easier to recognize manipulation. Next tactic, use yes and to redirect control. Instead of saying no outright to some manipulative demand, use yes and to agree while steering the conversation in your favor. So let's say someone says something to you and you say, yes, and I think there's a better way to handle this that doesn't involve rushing. Next, invoke social proof subtly. Manipulators will very often rely on isolating their target. So refer to a broader social standard to subtly challenge them. You might say something like, I think most people handle these situations differently. I'm just curious why you are approaching it this way. Next, offer controlled choices. So give manipulators the illusion of control by offering limited options that work in your favor. You might say, you know what, John, we can either continue this conversation later or we can discuss it calmly now. It's completely up to you. Next is calling out the extremes. And you'll see this a lot with manipulators. They usually use extreme statements to unbalance you. They might say, you never listen to me. Counter this gently, exaggerating their own point, just by clarifying and saying, what I hear you saying is, in all the time that we've known each other, I've never listened even once. This reveals the absurdity of the manipulation or of their the accusation. So instead of directly calling out extreme statements, subtly guide the manipulator toward recognizing the exaggeration themselves. So when somebody makes an exaggerated claim like, "You never listen to me," or "You always make me feel this way," you can respond by gently reframing or asking a clarifying question that invites them to reconsider their absolutes without sounding confrontational. So the key to this approach is avoiding outright dismissal of their statement. That provokes defensiveness, and that gives them an opportunity to escalate. So instead of doing that, we're going to gently nudge them toward a more balanced perspective by either reflecting on their statement with curiosity or encouraging them to really rethink their wording and how they're wording themselves. So the aim here is to make them recognize the extremity of their comments and adjust it themselves. Let's walk through an example scenario here. Let's say you have a partner that says, "You never help around the house. I'm always the one cleaning." This kind of statement is an exaggeration designed to make you feel guilty and act out of obligation. Your response could be to gently highlight the overreach. You might say, "It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed right now. Can you help me understand that?" You don't use extreme language like never and always very often. So you're telling them that language is not common for their normal behavior. So we're showing empathy and subtly just inviting them to consider the absolute statement, the never or always. So this shifts the conversation toward a more constructive dialogue without triggering further emotional escalation. It encourages reflection without confrontation. So just by using soft language and questions, you avoid directly challenging the person, which can make them defensive. It also reframes the conversation. So instead of getting caught up in the exaggeration, you focus on understanding the real issue behind the statement. So this opens up space for productive conversation instead of reacting emotionally to the extremes. It also maintains an emotional balance between the two. So as a few tips for this, use phrases like "it seems like" or "it sounds like" to soften your response. Like, "It seems like you're really frustrated right now. Can we talk about what's been happening lately?" Next technique, control the emotional temperature. Manipulators may try to escalate emotions. You have to stay deliberately calm and neutral, which will make their emotional tactics seem exaggerated and inappropriate by contrast, and that undermines their control. Next, reclaim the conversation by forgetting their manipulative point. So when manipulators circle back to the same manipulative point repeatedly, act like you don't remember and shift the conversation. You might say something like, "I'm sorry, could you remind me why we're discussing this?" This forces them to restart the manipulation and usually weakens the effect. And if you do this twice, you weaken it significantly. As a final thought here, a crucial element in dealing with manipulation is controlling your emotional response. Manipulators rely on triggering your emotions, whether it's guilt, obligation, fear, maybe a few others. Keep that in mind and memorize those acronyms, FOG and the CAVA, the CAVA. I sincerely hope this video was helpful, and I'm going to keep them coming for you. The next video coming out soon is going to be absolutely amazing. And you made it to the end. Most people don't do that. I know you're most likely committed to learning these skills, and I'm willing to bet you're one of the few people who realize that these are the skills that determine success, and they always have. If you want to level up your skill and take it from casual interest to something that changes your life, click the link in the description, and I promise it's going to blow your mind. I've got something for you. Until next time, if you're subscribed, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really hope you got something impactful from this video, and I hope that your day is the most powerful and meaningful version of today that you can make it. Take care.